On January 19th, 2008, 24-year-old Tommy Booth went drinking in a bar with a group of friends. 14 days later, his body was recovered in a creek directly behind the bar. The medical examiner ruled his death a probable drowning.
One thing that is coming to mind, they're having me talk about cognizance awareness. It's a feeling of like, I should know how to get from point A to point B, like where I'm at. But for some reason, I feel confused. His mindset didn't feel clear before he transitioned, and it's just because of something that would have been in his system that, to me, feels like something he would not have been used to dealing with or metabolizing. It feels like my body even, like I'm feeling it more in my legs. I feel kind of like numb. It feels like having difficulty walking in some capacity. So that's definitely more than just taking a drink.
No, that makes sense.
And it is questionable. It would obviously imply that someone did this.
Well, we think he was drugged. Tommy could hold his liquor, so when he said that it felt like something more, then I knew that Tommy didn't really do drugs. He was more of a drinker. So that validated for me that this wasn't just an accident.
The interesting thing that kind of came in correlation with this was they were having me talk about an investigation. And this is where it gets interesting. There's so much of an emphasis on the investigative side of this that this person's not even having me talk about the passing itself as much as they're having me talk about the investigation after. Okay. And there's a reason. When it came to an investigation around this death, the thing is, there's this feeling of just like error, like just a lot of error, like human error, to be honest. That's his like #1 message here is like, even beyond his cause of passing, interestingly, it's like, look at the details of the investigation. It doesn't add up. And that is one of the big truths that I feel like we're meant to kind of take away from today. So does that make sense for you?
It makes sense,
okay.
Yeah.
So the thing is that what's very distinctly being acknowledged is for some reason in the 2-month period after this passing, it does feel like in some capacity this would be reopened in some way.
What's important, I think, of the 2 months is when Kevin Gannon and his team started investigating the smiley face killers.
So that would be the relevance.
Yeah, that was the next couple months.
Wow.
I met his parents in 2008, shortly after Tommy's death. And the mother always had grave concerns about Tommy's death, that it was suspicious in nature and she thought he was murdered.
Very odd. Having me talk about the search area. Now, this is kind of strange. He's having me talk about where one would search and what would make logical sense. And he's like, this doesn't make logical sense. The way I would describe this is if a search and rescue or if like people were looking for him, the feeling is like where they looked in the beginning feels like way off is the way that I would describe it. But what's weird is it feels like where they would have been looking seems logical. So obviously you know the case, but for some reason there's this feeling of people either not looking at the right spot initially and then finding it later on, but it's like where we look in the very beginning of this isn't, there's something about this not being right.
What happened was we looked up and down. He was found in a creek, and the detectives told me that he was there the whole time in the creek. And the smiley face detectives do not believe that he was in the creek the whole time. I know Tommy wasn't there because his coworker had walked up and down that creek the day before.
I didn't see anything at all.
One of the theories out there is that really Creek was frozen and that Tommy was under the ice, and that's why all the search people, including yourself the day before, missed him.
And that area wasn't frozen?
No.
No, it was not frozen.
Are there any questions that have particularly been big as far as things that you've really felt you've needed to know, or, you know?
Yeah, the thing about the creek, and I don't know if you'll know that, I like to believe that, you know, he was in the creek the whole time. They're telling me that he was only in the water for a couple days, and I don't want to think about,
of course,
where he was the other 2 weeks.
I don't know how to explain this, but for some reason I feel like he would have gotten really, 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 really cold before he was ever in the water. And I know this is very strange to say, but he's not putting an emphasis of being in the water. I feel like I'm in nature. What I will say, just to take away from this at the very least, is I can tell that he was not in the water for that entire time.
Yeah, that was hard to hear, but I have to hear it. It does make a difference. It really does.
I really want to keep this in mind. I have to talk about health, and it's kind of health with family. For the men in your family, it's really good to just take into consideration that blood pressure is going to be something that we really have to keep in mind. Now, heart issues, they happen to men. It's not uncommon, but the thing is that, let me see what that is. I don't even know where to start. When it comes to like a family and a gene perspective, it's possible that within your family, there might be multiple men who end up at a later age dealing with blood pressure issues, but also deal with either a heart murmur or heart arrhythmia. But I feel like I have to kind of go to heart, and this kind of correlates with blood pressure. So just kind of keep that in mind. I have a couple people who've, you know, kind of came through and acknowledged passing in a bit of a similar sense, and it's almost saying like, keep in mind your own heart, because there's a man who was very stubborn who passed away, and he acknowledges dying as a result of this heart problem. His message is, don't be stubborn like I was. And the feeling is like, this is a strong guy, he's great, he's lovely, but he was really frustrated at the fact that he neglected this, because this is something that could have been treatable had we just known about it. I'm not wanting to go, and there's just a feeling of like, don't let you be me, basically, in the way this comes across. It's like, keep this in mind, be proactive in your health, do what I didn't, is kind of the message, so.
No history of heart disease.
Sure.
In the family.
Sure.
With the exception of my sister, had a heart issue, had open heart surgery. Delighted that she's fine now.
Great.
But it can't get much more serious than that.
Sure.
Just not a genetic line that we've known.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
That is unbelievable. You said the heart.
Right. And how that came through.
And we talked about it.
Right. I would say, honestly, if this is something that does come into play, it could affect men primarily. I'm not even looking at women so much. This is something that could affect men. So if you yourself notice like blood pressure or heart murmur, just see a doctor. But I feel almost like we have to kind of like really take this into consideration. I was really going on about that.
Yeah, you were.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take that to heart.
Yes, absolutely.
I just don't understand.
When it's our time to go, you know, it's hard for us to understand.
Because I was always on top of him about his health.
Right.
Always on top of him about it.
I want to mention this house, because this is actually interesting. There is a susceptibility to some activity in this house that I have to mention, but it's in the other room. I
know.
I have to talk about it, because I'm going more that way.
I know.
But yeah, it does come through, and it is something to be mentioned.
Who is that?
It's a person. And it's the same person, and I tried to come through to 3 separate people that have all been in this house. There's a reference to a renovation. There's a reference to redoing, and I have to reference to up, a reference to up, and then I'm going also to that side of the house as well. That actually triggered some stuff that's coming through, because I'm getting a reference. I'm getting a symbol for a wall being torn down when I always do that.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's been any renovations?
Yeah, I did a renovation.
Did we do over the wall thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a staircase that went up the back staircase.
Okay.
We took the staircase away. And the wall that was there divided the kitchen and the dining room.
Right. That makes sense, because I'm kind of, that's more of closer to the area that I'm kind of drawn to, where there might be activity for some reason.
Is it male or female?
The way it comes across, I'm definitely getting more of a male impression.
I've had to deal with this before.
Yeah.
And quite an unfriendly situation.
Right.
And yeah, this one's not so. This one's just wants to hang out, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't view it as a negative thing at all. Yeah.
But I can understand if people sometimes feel scared and.
For sure.
But I mean, don't they live everywhere?
Exactly. Well, that's kind of the thing I always tell people. People are always afraid of, you know, people being in their house, people that they can't see. I always tell people, if you were to take 100 strangers off the street and invite them into your house, most likely none of them would hurt you. None of them would most likely want to do you any pain, even out of 100.
Have you ever walked into one where you're just like, whoa?
One time. And
What do you do with them?
You know, it's something to be navigated. It's actually intentionally why I avoid those types of things. I just don't like that negativity. And I think for me, a big goal in doing a reading is really to set the intention to connect only to information that's going to be able to help a client versus anything, you know,
Poltergeist.
Yeah, so I don't even interact with that kind of stuff just because, for my sake, it's overwhelming. But for the people that have to deal with it, it's brutal and can be very difficult. But I'm very thankful. I mean, I just dealt with a lot of positive
situations.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Funny enough, kind of interesting. I have to reference your residence shift. I know that sounds probably like...
No, it's great. I have been juggling, where do I want to live?
Sure.
I see too many signs that I need to move.
Sure.
And I have a huge emotional attachment to this house. So that's why I'm like, should I be moving from here?
Right. Because we've far outgrown this space. I mean, we've outgrown it.
Here.
Here. So there is going to be a need for another move, but it may not have to be a drastic one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I know where I need to be, but I know I can't go there yet.
Right. I think as the timing's right, you'll know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have another energy that's coming through that I have to talk about. When I have really sensitive information coming through, I generally have to figure out how to navigate it. I have to be sensitive to my clients' feelings, and sometimes that puts me in a position where it's hard to deliver. It's popping in.
Okay.
There's a child that's coming through as well, and this is what's confusing me. This is a female child. She's referencing to the fact that her passing was abrupt and immediate.
Mm-hmm.
She's acknowledging that she was not conscious at the time that she passed away, and that's the significance that she's bringing forward. She's sweet, she's beautiful, she's lovely, but she was not conscious when she died. And that is something for her that was a relief because she wasn't aware of her passing. She's referencing, this isn't family. This isn't family. This does not feel like family. So I'm not, whereas I am going to connect to family, this isn't family. This is separate. This is a child that unfortunately passed. This is the weirdest thing. There's just a reference to Joseph. Oh, like I'm getting actually kind of uncomfortable. Okay. This is the weirdest thing. She was shot.
Oh, I do know. I do know.
Okay, who would this be? Because Joseph did this. Joseph did this.
I don't know his name, but it could be very well his name. It's a little girl who was around 10 years old who was shot, and then her...
Wow.
We put her funeral together.
Was there a eulogy? Did more than one person do a eulogy?
I did the eulogy.
Do you have a sister?
My sister did the eulogy.
Okay, that's the connection.
Wow. Oh my God, I got goosebumps. Whoa.
I'm like really,
oh my God. Wow.
Being a medium, I've connected to children before. It's always one of the hardest things for me to connect to for obvious reasons, but this was just the absolute hardest and incredibly difficult to have to see. I kept hearing a gunshot in the background. It was very overwhelming for me. She's coming through and she's acknowledging that she's with her mother, okay?
Yeah.
She's not upset at her mother because she's acknowledging the fact that her mother knew about the father, but that they had different plans. It's like, I want to get out of the situation. I want to get out of the situation. Do you know what happened to her mother?
She was shot.
Also?
Yes.
Was someone lit on fire?
The house is burned, yeah.
God, I'm sorry. It's like this has never happened before with this extent of a reading. So with the little girl that's coming through, she's coming through pretty clearly, and I'm actually curious to see what your connection is. What's the connection with her?
So I did a show
Right.
in the 80s, early 90s called Growing Pains. And there was a little girl who played my character as a little girl.
Okay.
And she was a little child actress that we knew. And my dad is an agent, and he was her agent. And so she was in our life quite a bit around that time. And the father murdered her, and her mother shot them, and then set the house on fire. And then my family, because she had no family, buried her and her mother and paid for the funeral. And my sister did the eulogy, so you mentioned that.
Right. I would be curious to see if there's a Joseph connection on that side.
I would not be surprised if her father's name was Joseph. It sounds familiar. Why would she come through and some people that are super close to me not come through?
The reason why she came through really strongly was, in a big part, I feel a big sense of appreciation about the funeral, about the eulogy. Because with that situation, you know, it was pretty much just them. And that was an appreciation.
Okay.
So that would be why.
It definitely did seem like she was trying to say thank you and was appreciative. And to have people that weren't even related to me to come in was a very nice thing. That was something that really stuck with me.